Monday, February 12th, 2024, was Charles Darwin's 215th birthday, and science denying religious extremists noted the occasion by telling all their usual lies about Darwin, as if he is relevant somehow to how much more we know about evolution than he could have even guessed. Uh, this image was posted by Eric Hovind, son of convicted fraud and charlatan Kent Hovind. Imagine being raised by a pathological felon such that you have no integrity whatsoever because accuracy and accountability and honesty and, let's face it, honor just don't have any value in your family. Just tell whatever lies are necessary to get the money from the rubes foolish enough to believe you. Now, Eric isn't quite as stupid as his insanely narcissistic dad, but Eric is just as dishonest. He exists as proof that the grifter doesn't fall far from the con man. Just look at all the lies in this one image, which are all part of one bigger lie. The notion that accepting evident reality, specifically the facts of evolution, will somehow lead to all these other things. Because if you accept reality, it means that you reject the fantasy on which these believers' fabled morality is based. Darwin is featured here because the make believers try and deny that evolution is a process that can be seen in action today. Instead, the wanna pretenders prefer to imagine that evolution is just an idea that Darwin came up with, as if uh, Darwin was one of those long bearded guys, those weirdos who start up all those religions in the 19th century. The creationists pretend that ours is the religion of Darwinism or of evolutionism. Either way, it's still another lie. But that's all they got. Everything they believe is a lie, so all they have is lies. The truth is not in them. They don't care what the truth is. They would rather make believe something else instead. So let's look at each of these libelous allegations, starting with moral relativism. What does evolution have to do with moral relativism? Nothing whatsoever. This is an example of where religious extremists are completely confused about several things all at once. At first, there's a false dichotomy. Creationists tend to think in binary, where everything is either this or that. It's either good or evil or black or white. There's no shades of gray, where reality includes a spectrum of color. Here, the false dichotomy is that in order to believe in God at all, one must blindly believe every absurd impossibility in the Bible, no matter how bizarre or obviously poetic it may be, and that anything short of a strictly literal interpretation equates to godlessness, atheism. They don't, won't, or can't honestly admit how many educated Christians around the world understand why evolution is a fact, and at the same time, they believe in the Bible too, albeit not entirely literally. Mainstream Christians are smart enough to know that much of the Bible was obviously intended to be metaphorical. When pressed, biblical literalists will admit this too, on the excuse that the Bible is literal except when it isn't, except that they have no way to tell what parts are literal and what are not, because that seems to change with the speaker or the topic. If a believer timidly admits that, any particular passage is only a metaphor on Wednesday, that same speaker will treat it as literal again on Thursday, if not later the same day or with the very next person they talk to. So they're confused about that, but that's not all. Moral relativism is the notion that one person or culture may view a particular action or policy as moral or immoral, where another culture or person may hold the opposite opinion. Religious fundamentalists contrast moral relativism against objective morality, imagining that they have the objective standard, as if unbelievers don't, as if we have no basis for morality at all. But as with everything else, believers are wrong about this too. At first, they don't have objective morality. All they have are the subjective and largely uneducated opinions of those who pretend to speak for their God. Even if there really was a God, they still have no reason to give for how they can know whether something is moral or not. It's just that someone said so, and then not even why they say so. So at best, it comes down to God's opinion, which is subjective by definition. Though they don't accept that because they somehow believe in an erroneously assumed authority to the point that they refuse to consider evidence proving when a given authority is wrong. They think that if an authority said it, then it's correct, even if and even after the facts and evidence disprove that authority or their claims. The argument from authority is a logical fallacy, meaning invalid, flawed, or dysfunctional reasoning. But then All of their apologetics depend on logical fallacies. And that's why when it comes down to science versus faith, then it's a contest of rational versus irrational. So not only do believers not have the objective standard of morality that they pretend to have, but we unbelievers arguably do have that because we understand why something is moral or immoral. For example, everyone everywhere innately understands that a particular action or choice is immoral or wrong if it somehow diminishes happiness, well being, or health, or if it somehow causes unnecessary harm or suffering, or both. So, everyone wanting to violate that code anyway, like Christians very often will do, have to make up bullshit excuses to justify their crimes, usually on the basis of religious or political prejudice. I should make another video just on this because I have a lot more to say, but that's for another time. For right now, all believers have is the lie that Big Brother is always watching, so you'd better do as you're told and don't do any of these other things unless God changes his mind and tells you to. Because if you do what God tells you not to do, or actually what the clergy told you not to do, then you'll be punished, supposedly, both in this life and in the next. And believers will still do it anyway. It doesn't stop them because they use the excuse that their personal God agrees with them and has forgiven them. Whereas we have an understanding that we evolved as a social species, that we are dependent on society, and that society is in turn dependent on us to cohabitate productively. Now, those who are reliable, compassionate, generous, true to their word, and all of that tend to be favored among their clans. So, in primitive societies, these people would be in the best position to be fruitful and prosperous, and their kids would carry on those genes. Whereas aberrant deviants, whether they have an underdeveloped prefrontal cortex or a lack of mirror neurons or a neurological disorder that's making them selfish, callous, and cruel, such people would be ostracized from society and removed from the gene pool, either by being banished, imprisoned, or killed. So it's easy enough to see how social species favors those people over time, good people over time, while generally keeping the assholes to a minority position, though it might always look like that, because they tend to make a lot of noise and spectacle. But here I am still contrasting the believers and the unbelievers when we have to remember that there are plenty of Christians who understand evolution and accept it as a demonstrable fact. And they can share our common, objective standard of morality, or they can cling to the subjective standard that they think is objective, but that is really more relativistic than they'll ever admit as believers. The next lie is that if you accept evolution, you're going to get an abortion or that you'll support abortion. Again, there's no correlation here. Statistics have shown that girls from private Christian schools where evolution is not taught are more likely to get an abortion than girls in public schools. But that's not the only hypocrisy here. Let's not forget that the Bible says that the mere fine for causing a miscarriage is significantly lower than the penalty for murder, because the Bible does not consider abortion to be murder. In fact, Numbers chapter 5 rather clearly endorses performing an abortion with God's direct assistance and permission, and not for any good reason either, not for any morally defensible reason, but for no better reason than that a husband is concerned that his wife may have cheated on him. And believers will lose their minds trying to find some excuse to get out of admitting that this would be an abortion. But as I've explained in several other videos, there's no way out of this one. The issue of abortion has nothing whatsoever to do with religion or evolution. It's a matter of bodily autonomy, whether women and girls have rights over their own bodies. The religious extremists would deny them that because Western religion is all about denying human rights. The next of these lies is that if you understand what they call Darwinian evolution, then you'll endorse eugenics because these idiots think that evolution is eugenics, as if natural selection means that the strong weed out the weak. I do more phylogeny videos than I think anyone ever. Natural selection is featured in all of those to some degree, but there's never any weeding out of the weak. That's just not a thing. I think the problem is that these weak-minded twits worry that they're going to be weeded out. They should know that Darwin never proposed any such thing. In fact, he spoke out against eugenics. For example, when he arrived in Australia many years before he realized that natural selection was a thing, Darwin discovered a sort of eugenic genocide going on where the Aboriginal people were being marginalized, put in reservations, and other attempts to dwindle their numbers in favor of the incoming colonists. Darwin lamented that that terrible calamity was happening to those poor people because that is an injustice. And another injustice is that modern Christians now accuse Darwin of being responsible for that very travesty, even though it was already going on before he even knew about it, before he ever got there, which was still decades before he realized his famous theory, so that can't have been the cause of it either. It can't be the fault of his theory, but, those who believe in lies are going to lie for those beliefs. And why else would they accuse Darwin of promoting eugenics? For example, the next on Hovind's list of lies is racism. Trying to pin this one on Darwin is especially funny, or rather sad, because, well, for one thing, if Darwin was a racist, big damn deal. Everybody in his time was racist. Doesn't matter. Sound theories come from lots of awful people sometimes. However, it happens to be that Darwin was probably the least racist person of his day. He was part of the aristocracy, the ethnocentric era of imperial England. It would be perfectly understandable if he was racist, as everybody was. But somehow, strangely, despite the fact that they accuse him of this all the time, he was not racist at all. We would not even consider him racist if he lived in our time. But in his time, everybody was racist except him. Darwin's most famous book was On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. And believers said that if Darwin mentioned favored races, well, then he must be racist, except, of course, that they're judging the book by the cover and they don't read anything else. And Darwin wrote about favored races of cabbages and mussels and things like that, not people. And back then, they used the word race in place of subspecies or breed because, languages evolve just like organisms do. Darwin's work offered no support for racial purity or superiority. In fact, he criticized both of those ideas. In all of Darwin's collective works, there is only one paragraph that seems to be racist until you read the rest of the book. Then you realize that he only started out speaking the language that was ubiquitous throughout anthropology until that time. All of his associates and predecessors were exceedingly racist, and they were all Christian too. They claimed that different species or races of people, and it would be fair to call them different species at this point because that was what a lot of them said, but that all these different people were created in different colors and placed on separate continents with the intent that they remain separate. Darwin was the notable holdout who pointed out that no one can even tell how many races there are, nor how to distinguish them. In the very book that creationists point to trying to impugn him, Darwin called out his contemporaries for their racism, saying that it's all bullshit because he said, and he was the very first person to say this, that everyone alive everywhere belongs to the same race, the human race, and there is no other. In his first book, Voyage of the Beagle, Darwin documented his 5-year voyage around the world, wherein his observations always favored the indigenous peoples, and he criticized his own people for their ethnocentric imperialist colonialism. He abhorred every aspect of slavery as an abomination of human rights, and he opposed the genocide of indigenous peoples, which was going on in a lot of the places that he happened to visit. He even implied at one point that he preferred dark-skinned Tahitians to the people of his own comparative pallor, and he praised a black military commander in South America as being the nicest man that he had ever met. The point is, we never see from Darwin any of the racial bigotry that was so common among Christians in his day and still to this day. Darwin was not racist, and Darwinism is not racist, meaning that evolution is not racist. Now let's move to this other tower of lies. So Hovind argues that if you accept Darwinism, then that leads to Marxism, or maybe it causes Marxism, or is that, I don't know. Who knows what these idiots think? I think it's funny that how often I hear Marxism brought up as one of the great ills of this country. That everybody that accepts evolution, or there's anybody that's on the political left, or anybody that isn't on the far right, that somehow they're all Marxists. We're all promoting Marxism. And the weird thing about that is I think honestly that I probably met 4 Marxists in my adult life. I had an interview with one of them who tried to pitch Marxism to me, but his arguments weren't very good. I remain unconvinced. I don't think it's a very good political theory. Your mileage may vary. But the point is, I and practically everybody else are being accused of Marxism by people who don't know what the fuck Marxism is. We're not Marxists. So, another important thing was that Darwin published his biological theory in 1859, and Karl Marx published his political theory in 1848. The Communist Manifesto was published 11 years before Darwin's theory even existed. So, Darwinism obviously did not cause Marxism, nor communism either, which is another false suitcase in this pile of shit. Oh, we skipped over Auschwitz, referring to the Nazi concentration camp, because creationists want to blame Darwin for everything evil, pretending as if Darwin was a racist eugenist when he was neither, and pretending as if Hitler was an atheist and a Darwinist when he was neither of those either. In fact, Adolf Hitler always only ever identified as a Christian, and more specifically, a Catholic. He did so consistently, both publicly and privately, his whole life. He did complain at one point about the structure of the Christian church impeding his ambitions, which he hated, but he never recanted his belief in what he called the truth of that faith. Thus, there is every indication that Hitler still considered himself to be a Christian till the day he died. Hitler was no Darwinist either. Translators from German to English may use the word evolution whenever they mean development, and Hitler spoke of economic, military, and cultural development / evolution, but all throughout Mein Kampf. But the one time he mentioned Darwinian evolution was only to reject it outright. He used typical creationist arguments that evolution could only occur within definite limits, which he identified as being within a single species, meaning microevolution. And he also referred to kinds in certain translations, just like creationists today say that evolution can only occur within kinds, by which they mean, usually mean species. In this way, they can accept microevolution, but still reject macroevolution, which Hitler said was impossible, and he described it as a sin against the eternal creator. Hitler was a creationist, not a Darwinist. Hitler did not accept, employ, or use evolution. He did not promote evolution. He did not believe evolution. He did not understand evolution. He was a creationist. And I think it's funny that such arguments would be made when Nazis are famously Christian, Gott mit uns on the belt buckles and all of this, and the Ku Klux Klan in the United States describe themselves as an exclusively creationist organization. They do not accept evolution. So that's the Klan and the Nazis, Christian groups. Believers can criticize totalitarians like Chairman Mao or Joseph Stalin as atheists, and that's fine. But Hitler was definitely one of your boys, not ours. Speaking of Stalin and Mao and that next suitcase for communism, it is important to note that those two communists were responsible for killing millions of their own people. But it's kind of important how that happened. Stalin hated Darwinian evolution. He believed in Lamarckian evolution, which was already commonly rejected even before he was born. He believed that the science of genetics was some sort of hoax, and he had Darwinian scientists gulagged so that he could promote a disastrous pseudoscience through a madman called Trofim Lysenko. Lamarckian Lysenkoism held the foolish notion that plants were somehow naturally communist and that crops would spring out of duty to the state or something silly like that. China's Chairman Mao also bought into this insanity, the same insanity, and the result was, in both countries, the worst famine in the history of mankind. And it happened in both countries at the same time. And it was caused by denying Darwinian evolution. So, you can say that Stalin and Mao killed millions of people, but the truth is, denying evolution killed millions of people. As I said, our agricultural industry depends on evolution. And there's another suitcase here labeled bestiality. Don't ask me what nonsense creationists were thinking of here. Although I have talked to a few of these morons who were so stupid that they thought evolution would only work if two different species interbreed to produce a hybrid. That's impressively stupid, but then so are they, and their whole phony baloney science denying superstition. And finally, the last case in this pack of lies is the assertion that accepting the observable and demonstrable realities of evolution will lead to atheism. But that's not what happened to Darwin. He had originally studied for the clergy, and he was still a Christian when he worked out his theory and published his book. It wasn't until years later, and the death of his daughter, that caused him to doubt the existence of God. The science of evolution had nothing to do with that. The pioneers and some of the best champions of evolution were Christian, and some of them still are. Understanding and accepting evolution does not challenge their faith, nor does understanding that some of those biblical passages were certainly more poetic than literal. You know what does challenge the faith? When folks like Eric Hovind, and really every creationist apologist out there, lies so blatantly, obviously, constantly, all the time. For example, the lesser Hovind tweeted out this link to another set of bullshit peddlers offering wrong answers in Genesis. And listen to how they lied about Darwin. They said that if Charles Darwin had even an ounce of the understanding of the genetics that we have today, all of his ideas and publications would have been considered invalid. Except that every genomic study I've seen or ever heard of confirms common ancestral phylogeny for every lineage that has ever been sampled. I can show many examples to prove that, where these anti-science scammers can't show one legitimate exception which contradicts evolution the way they just lied and said that it did. We know better. And they all lie like that. Look at what Ray Comfort posted on Darwin Day, where he said that Darwinian evolution is unscientific, which is a lie, because evolution is one of the best supported theories in all of science, better supported than even the theory of gravity. It's robust with profound explanative and predictive power and an overwhelming preponderance of evidence from many different fields. Our livestock and agricultural industries depend on evolutionary principles, as do many of our studies in medicine and toxicology, and of course, every aspect of biology and genetics, even petrogeology, the fossil fuel industry. So Ray Comfort is obviously lying when he says that evolution is unscientific. If you tell me that you don't accept evolution, I can personally show you all the evidence you will ever need to see to convince you. But believers always run from that challenge because they don't want to understand reality. They want to make believe in a fantasy. Ray Comfort went on to say that evolution is unobservable, which is another lie, because our farmers and ranchers have developed new strains, cultivars, and breeds, and so on, over and over again. Ken Ham, CEO of Answers in Genesis, and Kent Hovind of Creation Science Evangelism, and several other creationists too, admit that even speciation has been directly observed in nature. Sometimes it's even been duplicated in the lab. So Ray Comfort says that evolution is unbelievable, but the majority of educated Christians and the entire global scientific community accepts evolution because they understand it better than Ray Comfort refuses to do. Yes, you have a handful of scientists who, because of religious indoctrination, they refuse to accept the science, but they amount to less than 1%. So the common saying is that if 99 and 44 100ths represents pure, as it does in the silver trade, then we're talking about 99.86%. That would represent the entire global scientific community, except for that less than 1% who, because of religious indoctrination and not because of the data, refuse to accept reality. Ray Comfort told one last lie in this post, that people accept demonstrable realities of evolution because they hate God. No, we don't hate your magic imaginary friend. And quite a lot of people accept evolution and still believe in a God. Others would rather believe in a God than not, but they are intellectually honest and they can't make believe what is not evidently true nor even possible. If you sincerely believe, that God exists and that he created all these species separately rather than allowing them to evolve the way they would have otherwise, and we know that, If you sincerely believe that the Bible is the Word of God and is the absolute truth despite everything that it says, then it has got to bother you that there is not one word of actual factual truth coming from any of these fundamentalist ministries. That all any of them really has are frauds, falsehoods, and fallacies. The fact that every single one of these professional apologists lies so obviously and shamelessly, constantly and continuously has got to bother you if truth means anything to you at all.